Everyone in Juneau told him the mountain would swallow him whole. But a broke old veteran wrapped in his red and black flannel and armed with nothing but stubborn hope took his loyal German shepherd and climbed anyway. He thought he'd inherited a forgotten fortress, just stone snow and silence. Until rangers started growling at the tower floor and a hidden vault opened beneath their feet. What they uncovered had been buried for 50 years, a truth worth hundreds of millions, and a betrayal powerful enough to destroy an empire. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, let us know where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. Snow battered Juneau's harbor like a wild animal clawing at the edges of the world. The wind carried the taste of ice and desperation. Frank Walker sat alone on a frozen bench near the docks, clutching his red and black buffalo-plaid flannel jacket, tighter around his body. At 64, his shoulders were still broad beneath the fabric, but time and sorrow had eaten away at the strength he once carried with pride. Gray threaded through his once dark hair, now cropped short in that stubborn military way he could never let go of. Deep-set eyes, the color of storm clouds, watched the shifting lights of the fishing boats, as if searching for answers he had long stopped believing existed. Beside him lay Ranger, a 7-year-old German shepherd with thick sable fur dusted by snow, ears perked forward like radar scanning for threats only he could sense. Ranger's amber eyes, alert and fiercely loyal, flicked up to Frank with a silent question. "Are we moving yet? Are we okay?" That dog had survived with Frank through sleepless nights, hunger, headaches, and the ghosts that clawed at Frank's mind when memories of soldiers' screams returned without warning. Frank rubbed his gloved hand along Ranger's neck, feeling the warmth beneath. "We're still here, buddy," he murmured. Though the words came out steady inside, he felt the truth. They were at the very edge of surviving. Frank had once been a decorated army infantryman deployed in Afghanistan. But after the war, the medals didn't translate into jobs or healing. The military cutbacks came first, then the grief of losing his wife Ellen to cancer, and later the drifting away of his only son Michael. A silence more painful than any battlefield injury. Now the monthly veterans check barely covered cheap meals and the cheapest motel room when weather turned murderous. Tonight he didn't have enough even for that. Ranger nudged Frank's knee, sensing the ache in his bones and heart. The dog always knew when the darkness pressed harder. Frank gave him a sad smile. "Yeah, I know. We should find somewhere warm before your paws freeze right off." As he stood, pain shot through his knees, reminders of shrapnel that had never been fully removed, reminders that the war lived inside him no matter where he slept. He strapped his old military backpack on the fabric patched and faded, and Ranger rose to attention like the soldier's companion he had been trained to be. Frank trudged toward the homeless shelter near the edge of downtown. The building was squat and unwelcoming, its flickering sign barely visible through swirling snow. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed above rows of cots filled with people who had also slipped through society's cracks. Frank had learned to keep his distance. Trauma taught him that closeness only made loss hurt more. A woman with thin-framed glasses and a clipboard stood near the entrance, stamping snow from her boots. This was Mrs. Karen Patterson, the shelter coordinator, around 50, with brown hair streaked in silver, tied into a tight bun. Her tired blue eyes carried a softness earned from helping those the world forgot. She noticed Ranger first. "Dogs have to stay outside," she reminded, though her voice wasn't harsh, just a rule she was forced to repeat. Frank nodded with quiet acceptance. Rules were rules. Ranger circled once, then sat beside the door, his body poised like a sentinel. Frank knelt to whisper, "I'll be right inside." Ranger pressed his head against Frank's palm, making the promise mutual. Inside, Frank approached a cot that had been assigned to him. Before he could remove his gloves, Mrs. Patterson appeared again, but this time she held a large white envelope. "This came for you," she said. "Certified mail. Forwarded here from your last address." Frank stared at it. Mail wasn't something he received anymore. Not for years. The envelope felt heavy in his grasp, thick paper expensive. The return address read, Morrison and Associates, Legal Services, Seattle, Washington. Something in his chest tightened. His breath came slow and shaky as he tore the seal. A crisp document unfolded, the typed words clear and cold. "Dear Mr. Frank Walker, we regret to inform you of the passing of Dr. William Walker. As his sole surviving blood relative, you have been named beneficiary of his entire estate, including a property known as Walker Fortress, located in the Alaska Panhandle near the Canadian border. You are required to appear in person within 30 days to claim the inheritance." Frank blinked. Once. Twice. His heartbeat hammered like boots on steel flooring. Dr. William Walker. He had heard the name only in the faintest fragments, whispered by his father long ago. A distant scientist relative. The black sheep. The hermit who turned his back on family and society. Why would such a man leave anything, let alone something called a fortress, to Frank? Another slip of paper slid into his palm. A brass key, ornate and surprisingly heavy, fell into his hand with a quiet clink. Strange symbols were carved into its bow, merging military precision with something older, almost mythic. Attached was a handwritten note. "The worthy heir will stand tall when the world demands they kneel." A shiver ran up Frank's spine, not from cold, but from the sudden weight of possibility. The words felt like they were aimed directly at the wounds he buried deep. Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow, her curiosity gently veiled behind professionalism. "Good news." Frank struggled for words. "I don't know." He looked at Ranger through the shelter's glass door. The dog sat unmoving, snow gathering on his fur, waiting with unwavering faith. Faith Frank couldn't even muster for himself. A fortress, a property, an inheritance. What did he have to lose by checking? His life was already threadbare. If the letter was real, maybe there was a roof waiting for them somewhere far from this cold concrete. If it was fake, he would be no worse off than before. But hope, that traitor, stirred within him. He folded the letter slowly, carefully, as though afraid it might vanish. He slipped the key into the inner pocket of his flannel jacket, feeling its cold weight through the fabric. Frank Walker stood tall, a posture drilled into him. During boot camp decades ago, feeling for the first time in years that his spine could support something like purpose. "Thanks," he murmured to Mrs. Patterson, and stepped back toward the entrance. Ranger's tail thumped once as Frank pushed open the door. Snowflakes immediately clung to his beard, silver and rough like his unspoken regrets. The wind hit him hard, yet he barely noticed. He knelt before Ranger and held the dog's face gently between his hands. "Looks like we might have a place to go," he whispered. "A real place." Ranger barked once, sharp and eager, as if he'd always known a change was coming. Frank lifted his gaze toward the dark mountains looming above Juneau, their peaks hidden by swirling white clouds. Somewhere out there in the crushing wilderness, a fortress waited. A fortress with secrets from a life Frank never knew he was part of. And in that moment, battered by snow and uncertainty, Frank allowed himself a small, trembling flame of belief. Maybe destiny had not forgotten him after all. Morning light in Juneau was slow to rise, and when it did, it emerged as a faint silver glow strangled by winter clouds. Frank Walker stepped out of the shelter with Ranger at his heel, both leaving behind the only warmth they had known in days. The air sliced into their lungs like knives, and the snow beneath their boots groaned with every step. Frank's breath curled into smoke as he squeezed the envelope inside his jacket pocket. An inheritance letter that felt like the last thread tying him to hope. His knees ached, those old scars from shrapnel embers flaring beneath the skin every time he moved. But he pushed forward because the alternative was dying slowly in the streets, piece by forgotten piece. Frank used the final bills left from his veteran's check to hire transportation to the remote coordinates listed in the letter. The only vehicle available was an old pickup truck for rent behind a hardware shop, its orange paint flaked away to reveal battle-worn steel beneath. The owner, a stocky man named Ray Hensley, reluctantly handed Frank the keys after eyeing the veteran's tattered flannel and weary stance. Ray looked to be in his late 40s, thick beard frozen with tiny ice clusters and eyes narrowed by years of distrust. "That road ain't right," he muttered, voice rough as gravel. "Too many that went up never came back. Fortress or no fortress, this ain't worth dying over." He rubbed his gloved hands like he was washing away guilt for even letting Frank go. "If the engine freezes, don't expect miracles." Frank simply nodded. Fear was something he had learned to swallow long ago. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat, claws tapping a rhythm of readiness. The truck coughed to life, its engine roaring against the cold, like a beast reluctant to awaken from its icy slumber. Frank gripped the wheel, praying the truck would at least get them halfway there. Through the windshield, Juneau shrank behind them, just a handful of buildings and streetlights swallowed by a white horizon. As they drove through town one last time, locals stared from behind foggy windows. Pity flickered in some eyes, disgust in others, but most carried the same unspoken judgment. The old man's finally gone mad. The whispers weren't loud, but Frank could feel them wrapping around his shoulders, heavier than snow. He's chasing a fairy tale. He's gone too far. Ranger let out a low growl, disgruntled by the stares. Frank placed his hand on the dog's back. "We're going to prove them wrong," he promised the animal and himself. Once the paved roads ended, the real danger began. The highway gave way to a narrow, icy trail carved through dense, evergreen forest. Snow-laden pine branches drooped low like mourning figures. Ranger's ears twitched constantly, his nose working overtime to read every shift in wind and movement. The silence of the wilderness was broken only by the crunch of tires and Frank's pounding heart. Halfway up the mountain, as the road slithered along a deadly cliff, a figure stepped into their path. Frank slammed the brakes, and the truck skidded sideways before halting inches from the drop. Ranger jumped forward, barking fiercely through the windshield. The stranger didn't flinch. He stood like a tree rooted in the snow, tall, broad-shouldered, the lines in his face carved by frost and years of unspoken stories. His beard was peppered gray, and he wore a heavy hunter's jacket padded with scars from both life and wilderness. Underneath, his movements hinted at a soldier's caution. He approached the truck and tapped on the window. Frank lowered it slowly. "I'm Hank Dawson," the man said, voice low and steady as snow settling on pine needles. He appeared to be around 60, his steel blue eyes sharp with the kind of vigilance that never truly fades after you've lived through too many battles. A faded Marine Corps patch was sewn to his backpack, one survivor recognizing another. Ranger stopped barking, but didn't take his gaze off Hank, tail stiff like a coiled wire. "You must be Frank Walker," Hank continued. "I figured I'd meet you here." Frank frowned. "How did you know?" Hank's breath rose in frost. "Doc Walker was my closest friend. For 20 years I hauled supplies up to that fortress for him. Swore I'd help whoever came looking once he was gone. Didn't think anyone would." He glanced at Ranger with a show of respect. "Fine dog you've got. Smart, too." Frank studied Hank carefully. He looked like someone who had seen the end of the world more than once and walked away each time with a piece of it in his stare. A man molded by promises and regrets. Hank circled the truck before climbing into the back seat. "Engine won't handle the last stretch," he warned. We go the rest of the way on foot." Frank swallowed a lump in his throat. His knees throbbed just imagining the climb. But turning back was no longer an option. They trudged into the woods, each step a battle against the snarling wind. Ranger padded ahead, nose skimming the trail. Frank noticed Hank's movements, methodical alert, always checking their six, like he expected something dark to emerge from the shadows. "Doc Walker was brilliant," Hank said as they climbed. "He built that fortress to protect his work. They wanted what he had badly. Drove him up here. Called him paranoid crazy." He paused, breathing heavier. But crazy men don't build structures that can survive Armageddon. He wasn't running away. He was preparing. The forest thinned, revealing the brutal drop of the cliff below. In the distance, wolves howled, a chilling chorus that raised the hairs on Frank's arms. Ranger growled, teeth flashing his body, a tense barrier between his master and the unknown. Frank patted his side, signaling Ranger to stay close. He could feel terror curling in the pit of his stomach. Not just fear of wolves or cliffs, but fear that he didn't deserve whatever waited for him. Fear that hope only ever led to heartbreak. Hours passed. Snow deepened. The sun vanished behind a bruised sky. Then, as they turned one final bend, Hank pointed with his gloved hand. There he breathed. Frank looked up and his heart nearly stopped. Walker Fortress rose out of the mountain like a steel-boned cathedral. Towering stone walls reinforced with thick iron clung to the cliff's edge as if defying gravity itself. A central tower pierced the sky like a spear, aimed at heaven windows glinting with defiant light. The fortress looked ancient and modern at once, part medieval stronghold, part Cold War bunker, part stubborn monument to a man who refused to be erased. Frank's mouth fell open as Ranger barked in awe or challenge, Frank couldn't tell which. Hank placed a gloved hand on Frank's shoulder, grounding him. Doc built it to survive anything. Storms, bombs, betrayal. His jaw tightened. He didn't trust the world anymore. And he had damn good reason not to. Frank stared, feeling the mountain's wind whirl around him, tugging at his flannel jacket like a reminder that everything he knew might change tonight. Ranger pressed against Frank's leg, sensing the seismic shift in his master's heart. The fortress his inheritance awaited. And for the first time in years, Frank Walker felt something stronger than fear. Purpose. Wind howled against the fortress walls like a beast demanding entry, and the heavy front door creaked shut behind Frank Walker with a final thud that echoed through the massive structure. Inside, the place breathed cold. The air tasted of stone-old books and decades of silence preserved in dust. Frank lowered the lantern he found at the entrance and swept its light across the hall. The interior dwarfed him, vaulted ceilings soared overhead, upheld by pillars of dark wood carved with patterns he didn't recognize. Leather-bound books occupied shelves stretching high into unreachable shadows. A grand fireplace, large enough to shelter a pickup truck, sat at the far end, its iron grate shaped like a roaring dragon's jaw. Even abandoned, the fortress felt alive, as if every stone remembered the man who built it. Ranger padded across the smooth floor, sniffing everything with eager curiosity. His thick coat glimmered in the lantern light, ears high and alert. He kept close to Frank, his nails clacking faintly. Frank's heartbeat matched the rhythm in nervous excitement. This place, impossible as it was, belonged to him now. Behind him, Hank Dawson secured the entrance, his broad frame filling the door. His breath came slow and controlled the posture of a man who had spent a lifetime studying threats. "Doc Walker never did anything halfway," Hank muttered with grim pride. He brushed snow from his beard, revealing a face carved by survival. Sharp cheekbones, a nose crooked from an old break, and lips drawn into a perpetual soldier's scowl. Yet his eyes softened as he looked around. He poured everything he had into making this place, Safe. Frank wasn't sure if he felt awe or fear. As he moved farther inside, a large desk caught his attention. Papers lay neatly in a stack untouched by time. A sealed envelope sat on top, his name written in elegant handwriting, Franklin Walker. His breath hitched. Hands trembling, he broke the seal. The letter inside was penned in flowing ink. If you are reading this, then I have finally lost my war with time. You are the last of our name worthy of continuing the fight. The world stole my work, my honor, my life, but it shall not steal the truth. Find the Northern Tower. Trust what others refuse to see. Dr. William Walker. Frank reread those words, feeling them settle deep into the wounds he carried from his own battles. He imagined this Dr. William Walker, the relative he never met, but somehow understood. Both cast aside by the very system they once served. Both punished for loyalty and honesty. Both left in the cold to survive alone. Ranger nudged Frank's leg as if urging him onward. The dog's instincts never failed him. Hank led them through a corridor lined with framed documents, medals, and faded photographs. In one, Frank recognized the profile of a man in a lab coat, tall and stern, dark hair pulled back neatly. William Walker must have been in his late 40s, then eyes bright with conviction, the posture of someone who had never once considered surrender. He was military research, Hank explained quietly. Developed genetic therapies that could have saved thousands of lives. Then a colleague stole everything and painted him as the thief. Army dropped him like a disease. Frank clenched the letter. Sounds familiar, he murmured. He thought of the day he'd been told his service was no longer needed, an envelope not unlike this one but full of dismissal instead of purpose. Eventually they reached a door reinforced with steel bars. Frost clung to its edges. A tarnished plaque read, North Tower. Frank's breath misted as he spoke. This must be it. The brass key in his pocket felt warm now, as if eager for its lock. He slid it into the mechanism. The tumblers groaned, then clicked. The door opened to a narrow, spiraling staircase. Ranger bounded ahead, nose low, tail stiff. Frank grabbed a rail and began the ascent joints, screaming in protest. Hank followed behind every step, a reminder of their age. The walls of the staircase were decorated with symbols, chemical structures, numbers, Latin phrases, Chinese characters, geometric puzzles. Frank traced one with his gloved fingers, feeling its grooves. What kind of mind builds a place like this? A mind that refuses to stop fighting, Hank replied. The climb stretched endlessly upward, until Frank's breath came in sharp, painful bursts. Finally, the stairs delivered them into a circular room atop the tower. The ceiling opened into a dome of reinforced glass through which the frozen stars glimmered like fragments of heaven. At the far wall stood a safe, massive and imposing, its steel surface etched with the same symbols from the stairwell. Complex. Impossibly secure. This is it, Frank whispered. He pressed a symbol that reminded him of the ones on the key, no response. He tried another, then another, still nothing. Ranger's ears perked. With a decisive bark, the dog shoved his snout toward a specific cluster of symbols on the lower right corner. Frank looked closer, DNA base pairing diagrams. The dog barked again, harsh and certain. All right, boy, Frank breathed. I trust you. He pressed the symbols in sequence C, G, A, T. A low rumble filled the tower. Gears shifted behind the steel door like ancient machinery awakening after decades of sleep. Then, click. The safe released with a heavy sigh, its seal broken. Frank pulled the door open, heart pounding. Inside were rows of meticulously organized binders, stacks of handwritten lab journals, sealed hard drives, film canisters, all labeled with dates stretching back over 30 years. One thick folder sat alone at the front, stamped Project Resurrection. Property of Dr. William Walker classified. Frank's hands shook as he reached inside. This wasn't just family legacy. This was evidence truth that someone had gone to war to bury. Before he could open it, Hank placed a hand on his shoulder. We should be careful. Whatever's in there, people have killed for less. Frank nodded, but his eyes stayed locked on the vault's contents. Ranger leaned against his leg, sensing the magnitude of this moment. Frank straightened his back, the old soldier in him stepping forward. William didn't spend his life gathering all this just for it to rot in a metal box. He built this fortress so someone would finish his fight. He closed his hand around the folder. And I will. Frank Walker stood in the tower room, his weathered hands gripping the thick folder labeled Project Resurrection. Snow flurried against the glass dome above him like frantic moths seeking escape. A tremor of fear crept along his spine, not fear for himself, but for the truth locked in these pages. This wasn't just research. This was a weapon, one capable of destroying reputations, empires, and the men who built them on stolen ground. Ranger pressed against his leg, warm and alive amidst the cold dread. The German shepherd's ears pricked forward, and his amber eyes scanned the room, sensing Frank's tension. Hank Dawson leaned his broad shoulder against the wall, arms crossed over his thick parka. His graying beard framed a face carved by battle and loss. His gaze rested on the safe's open contents, with equal parts reverence and terror. This is what he died. Protecting. Hank murmured. Every page, every file, all proof he wasn't the villain they made him out to be. Frank swallowed hard. 30 years' worth of dated entries, lab signatures, recorded observations, meticulous evidence of groundbreaking genetic therapy. Dr. William Walker had discovered a method to repair hereditary blood disorders, something that could save thousands of lives. But his partner had stolen the work, filed patents without him, and turned the medical world against its true creator. The company responsible, Redwood Biogen, was one of the largest pharmaceutical giants in the country. Their power wasn't just financial. It was political, military, and merciless. Frank could practically hear William's voice from beyond the grave. Stand tall when the world wants you to kneel. He set the folder down gently and scanned the USB drives in a locked steel box at the bottom of the safe. We need help, he said, voice low but steady. People who can understand this, verify it. Hank nodded and moved closer, speaking with the matter-of-fact confidence of a man who had led soldiers into fire. There's someone I know. Captain Elijah Brooks, retired JAG Corps. Smart as hell. Still fights for veterans screwed over by the system. Frank listened as Hank described this new ally. Elijah was in his early 50s, tall with a shaved head and a thick mustache peppered in black and white. He wore cheap suits like armor and had a stare that could intimidate generals. After a career defending soldiers wrongfully accused, the army pushed him out quietly, afraid of how loud his truth could become. He now helped forgotten veterans from a cramped office on the outskirts of Seattle. He doesn't scare easy, Hank added. He'll know what to do with the evidence. Frank nodded. That was good because fear was no longer a luxury he could afford. After reviewing a few documents, they secured everything again. Frank gathered his soldiers' resolve and said, "Let's head back down and figure out our next move." But fate moved first. Ranger's sudden snarl tore the silence apart. He lunged toward the tower door, teeth bared. Hank drew the hunting knife strapped to his thigh, moving to cover Frank instinctively. Somewhere downstairs, something metallic crashed to the floor. Frank grabbed the lantern, and they descended quickly, Ranger leading with a fury unmatched. The great hall lay in shadow, every corner a threat. The lantern's glow caught movement near the front entrance, a figure fleeing into the snowstorm, heavy boots pounding against the frozen ground. Frank's heart hammered. Someone had been inside the fortress, quiet, skilled, purposeful. Ranger bolted toward the door, barking thunder into the night. Frank restrained him by the collar. just before he disappeared into the blizzard. "They know," Hank muttered grimly. "We didn't even have an hour before they sniffed us out." Frank looked back toward the fortress interior and saw a single detail that froze his blood. The security camera in the corner, previously dead, was now blinking red, activated, recording. Someone had hacked into the system. Someone knew they found the research. Tom. The next morning, Frank placed a satellite phone call, one he prayed would reach the right person. After multiple transfers and delays, a voice finally came through the static. "This is Brooks." Frank introduced himself and gave only the most necessary details. Brooks didn't waste time. "Get the documents secured," he instructed firmly. "Do not go near any military or federal buildings. Redwood has friends everywhere." Brooks promised to arrive in Juneau within 2 days, bringing encrypted equipment, legal protocols, and media connections. Frank thanked him, the call ending, with the whisper of danger still clinging to the air. Shortly after, a second call came, this one from an unknown number. Frank hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice rasped through the speaker. "Walk away, Mr. Walker. You don't want to bleed again." Frank's free hand balled into a fist. His throat tightened with rage, the kind he hadn't felt since the day he buried his wife. "Who are you?" he demanded. "We are the people who make sure the world forgets men like Dr. Walker," the voice replied. "And if you keep digging, the world will forget you too." The line cut. Frank stared at the silent phone, blood pounding in his ears. Ranger whined, sensing danger like a thick fog gathering around them. Hank slammed his fist onto the oak table so hard the lantern rattled. "Bastards think they can scare us," he growled. "They don't know who they're dealing with." And he was right. Frank Walker had faced death before, face to face and breathing down his neck. He had seen comrades fall. He had climbed back from grief heavier than gunfire. He wasn't backing down now. By nightfall, the storm raged harder. Snow plastered the fortress walls, wind roaring like artillery. Frank and Hank barricaded the doors while Ranger patrolled restlessly, growls rumbling deep in his chest. Every shadow felt too alive, every sound too deliberate. Frank sat at the long table, a laptop Hank had powered through the fortress backup generators open before him. He uploaded document scans, prepared encrypted backups, determined that even if he died tonight, the truth wouldn't. Ranger froze suddenly, staring at a window. A silhouette lingered outside, too tall for a tree, too still for a passerby. Its outline vanished just as quickly. Frank swept a hand over Ranger's head, grounding both of them. "Let them come," he whispered. "We'll be ready." Thunder cracked across the sky like a cannon. The fortress stood strong, its heart burning with a new war. Frank placed William Walker's final letter beside the folder. He reread it once more, especially the last line. "Truth survives if someone refuses to kneel." Frank wiped a hand across his eyes, the soldier inside him fully awakened. He wasn't just inheriting a fortress. He was inheriting a fight. Dawn crept slowly over Juneau, as if the sun itself feared the truth that was about to be revealed. Courtroom lights replaced the flicker of lanterns and the roar of the blizzard. No stone walls protected Frank Walker here, only evidence, courage, and the loyal German shepherd resting at his feet like a living shield. Frank sat straight-backed, the red and black buffalo plaid flannel, worn over a clean white shirt, the same jacket that had kept him alive in the wild, now serving as armor in a different kind of battle. His face was older than the man who'd climbed the mountain just days ago. War from both the past and present had etched new resolve into the lines around his storm-gray eyes. Across the courtroom sat Dr. Richard Thornton, the man the world once called a savior of medicine. He appeared polished, expensive gray suit, tailored perfectly to his tall, once handsome frame, but time and guilt had sharpened his features cruelly. His silver hair, slicked back with precision, couldn't hide the cold arrogance in his crystal blue eyes. His jaw clenched, a testimony to the fear he refused to show. Years of basking in success stolen from another man had bred a pride that did not crumble easily, but Frank watched it crack bit by bit. On Thornton's left sat Redwood Biogen's legal army, sleek, silent predators in black suits, every one of them prepared to devour Frank if the law gave them the chance. Thankfully, Frank wasn't alone. Captain Elijah Brooks had arrived the night before with force and integrity rolled into a single man. In his early 50s, with broad shoulders and a jaw shaped by determination, Elijah carried himself like someone forged in battle, not by bullets, but by courtroom wars, where truth was the only weapon that mattered. His rich brown skin contrasted sharply with his crisp navy suit, and his glasses slid slightly down his nose whenever he leaned forward to make a point. Elijah currently stood before the judge, a stern woman named Judge Marlene Avery, late 50s, dark hair pinned into a tight coil, eyes sharp with justice. She was known for her intolerance of liars and corporate manipulation. It was no coincidence Elijah had fought to get her assigned to the case. Elijah presented Dr. Walker's journals page after meticulous page of groundbreaking research and the signed witness statements from former colleagues who had found their conscience just in time. He displayed the digital documents, each cross-checked for authentication. He played a recording, Dr. Walker's voice captured in a hidden message recounting betrayal, with pain trembling beneath scientific clarity. Thornton's mask broke. When Elijah finally dropped the ultimate blow, a dated memo proving Dr. Walker had invented the therapy a full year before Thornton filed his first patent, the courtroom gasped. Thornton paled, lips tightening, knuckles white as bone gripping the table. His eyes flicked desperately toward the exit. There was no escape. Judge Avery leaned forward, voice cool and unshakable. Dr. Richard Thornton, you knowingly stole the intellectual property of Dr. William Walker and sabotaged his career. You will surrender all patents, profits, and rights associated with the research. Furthermore, Redwood Biogen is ordered to compensate the Walker estate with $390 million in damages. Thornton lunged from his seat. This is absurd. That man was. The judge slammed her gavel and the echo silenced his panic. Enough. Court adjourned. It was done. After decades of exile, William Walker was vindicated. Justice cold, long delayed but glorious, had finally arrived. Ranger, sensing Frank's emotions, nudged his hand with a soft whine. Frank smiled faintly and scratched behind the dog's ears. We did it, boy, he whispered, a tremor running through every syllable. But even as victory washed over him, Frank's mind wasn't celebrating. He wasn't thinking of money, not even of vindication. He thought only of the promise he had made to the man he had never met, yet somehow knew in his bones. Mike the bailiff, a huge man with kind hazel eyes and freckles scattered across his pale cheeks, approached and offered a nod of respect. He stood nearly 6'5", built like a grizzly, but gentle, with Ranger scratching the German shepherd under the chin. Hell of a fight you brought, sir. The world doesn't see men like you often. There was awe in his tone, the quiet acknowledgement one soldier gives another. Frank thanked him with a humble dip of his head. By nightfall, Frank stood once more inside the fortress, their fortress feeling warmth radiate from a roaring fire in the grand hearth. The wind outside still howled, but now it sounded less like a warning and more like applause. Ranger lay curled near the fire chest, rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. His fur glowed bronze in the flickering flames, his paws twitching occasionally in dreams where he chased enemies away just as bravely as when awake. Packed boxes filled the hall, but not with luxury. They held sleeping bags, medical kits, legal forms. They were supplies for those expected to arrive soon, veterans who had nowhere else to go. Soldiers whose wounds, seen and unseen, were dismissed as if service had an expiration date. The fortress that once protected a secret would now protect men and women who society abandoned every day. Elijah Brooks sorted paperwork at a long oak table, glasses perched precariously as he scribbled notes. He had already contacted several veteran advocacy groups and mental health foundations. His passion burned brighter than any flame in this fortress. Hank Dawson, now caretaker of the grounds, reinforced security systems with calloused hands and mechanical precision. His hunting knife still strapped at his side just in case the world tried again to silence truth. Frank approached the tower balcony boots, echoing lightly as he climbed. When he stepped outside, snowflakes brushed softly against his cheeks. Below, the town lights shimmered like stars fallen to earth, unaware of the fortress watching over them. He held the stone railing, his knuckles pale beneath aged skin. Every scar, every cold night spent alone on the streets, every dismissal, every heartbreak, they had all led him here. His breath emerged in the air as a misty vow. We stood tall, he whispered into the wind voice, steady with emotion. When the world wanted us to kneel. Ranger padded up beside him, pressing against his leg, the unbreakable reminder that loyalty and love survive even the darkest winters. Frank ran a hand through the dog's fur, his heart finally light. Below them, the fortress pulsed with new purpose. It would no longer be a tomb of secrets. It would be a sanctuary, a rallying point, a beacon for every forgotten soldier. Truth had survived, and hope once frozen was burning again. There are moments in life when the world seems too cold, too heavy, too unfair. But even in the darkest winters, God has already placed a light ahead of us, a path we cannot see yet, but one we will reach if we keep moving forward. Frank lost everything before he found the fortress. He was abandoned before he discovered his purpose. And that is often where miracles begin, not when we are strong, but when we are broken enough for God to lift us with His own hands. If you're watching this right now, maybe you are standing in your own storm. Maybe you feel unseen, unheard, or forgotten. But remember this, God never loses track of His soldiers. He never lets a loyal heart walk alone. When doors slam shut, He is preparing a castle you haven't found yet. When others turn their backs, He is planning someone or something to lead you forward. A loyal dog, a stranger's kindness, a hidden blessing disguised as struggle. Nothing is coincidence in His plan. So hold on through the snow. Keep faith alive. The miracle you're praying for may already be waiting just beyond the next mountain. Before you go, I want to invite you to be part of this journey. Leave a comment below and share where you're watching from. We'd love to pray for your city, your home, your family. Tap the like button if this story touched you, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you stories of hope, courage, and the miracles that God places in everyday lives. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May He guide your steps, strengthen your heart, and lead you toward the fortress He built just for you. And may His peace fill your life today, tomorrow, and always. Amen.